The gate agent's voice cracked through the intercom just as the wheels of the Gulfstream began to move. "Mr. Voss, I'm sorry, but Ms. Calloway insists you disembark immediately." Marcus Voss looked down at his sleeping 4-year-old daughter curled against his chest, her small fingers still gripping the worn edge of her stuffed rabbit, and felt his heart drop into his stomach as the plane rolled to a stop on the tarmac. He had boarded this flight with a boarding pass he'd paid for with the last of his savings, a seat he desperately needed to reach his daughter's specialist 3 states away before her surgery window closed. But Vivian Calloway, the billionaire owner of Callaway Aerospace and the sole occupant of the private section, had taken one look at the little girl's worn shoes and Marcus's second-hand jacket and decided they didn't belong on her jet. She hadn't even raised her voice. She'd simply glanced at her assistant and said, "Get them off. I don't care how." The words had landed like a slap, and now Marcus stood in the aisle, humiliated, clutching his daughter Nora as she stirred awake, confused by the sudden stillness and the cold stares around her. If this story about kindness, dignity, and unexpected justice is already pulling at your heart, hit that like button, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, share this with someone who needs a reminder that karma is real, and subscribe to Wisdom Story House if you believe people deserve second chances and truth always finds its way to the surface. Marcus carried Nora down the jet steps into the harsh afternoon sun, his jaw tight, refusing to let his daughter see him break. He was a former army mechanic who had built a small aviation repair business from nothing after his wife passed away, working double shifts so he could keep Nora in the only home she'd ever known. He had scraped together enough money for 2 economy tickets on this exact flight, but a mechanical delay had bumped him onto Callaway's charter as a goodwill gesture from the airline after his original plane broke down, an irony that would soon matter more than anyone realized. As airport staff hurried him toward the terminal, Marcus turned back once, and his eyes met Vivian's through the oval window. She didn't flinch. She simply lifted her chin, satisfied, as if she'd swatted away an inconvenience rather than shattered a father's fragile hope. Vivian Calloway had spent 15 years building an empire on precision, control, and an unshakable belief that her time was worth more than almost anyone else's. She ran Callaway Aerospace with the same cold efficiency she applied to her personal life, and she had long since stopped noticing the human cost of her decisions. To her, the man and his daughter were a wrinkle in her schedule, nothing more. She settled back into her seat, ordered a sparkling water, and told her assistant to log the incident as passenger noncompliance so there would be no trace of what actually happened. She had no idea that the very mechanic she just humiliated held knowledge that would determine whether her company's newest fleet of private jets, including the one she was sitting in, would ever be certified to fly again. 3 days earlier, Marcus had been called in as a subcontractor to inspect a batch of hydraulic actuators destined for Callaway Aerospace's newest luxury jet line. What he found had chilled him, a manufacturing defect in the pressure valves that, under specific conditions, could cause catastrophic failure mid-flight. He had filed his report through the proper channels, flagged it as urgent, and trusted the system to catch it before those jets ever left the ground. He had no way of knowing that the report had been buried by a mid-level manager desperate to protect his quarterly bonus, and that Vivian Calloway, despite her reputation for control, had never actually seen it. Back in the terminal, Marcus sat with Nora in a hard plastic chair, rebooking a commercial flight with shaking hands while his daughter cried softly from confusion and hunger. A stranger, an older woman named Priscilla Whitfield who had witnessed the entire humiliation from a nearby gate, walked over and knelt down to Nora's level, offering her a granola bar and a gentle smile. She told Marcus that dignity wasn't measured by who let you fly first class, but by how you carried yourself when the world tried to make you small. Marcus thanked her, throat tight, and for the first time that day allowed himself to feel the full weight of his exhaustion. He was not just fighting for a flight, he was fighting to get his daughter to Dr. Elena Rourke, a pediatric cardiologist who had agreed to perform a rare, delicate surgery on Nora's heart, a surgery with a narrow window before her condition became inoperable. As Marcus finally boarded a delayed commercial flight 2 hours later, his phone buzzed with an email notification he had almost forgotten about, a follow-up from the Aviation Safety Board confirming they had escalated his original defect report after noticing unusual telemetry data from a Callaway test flight. The email asked him to appear as an expert witness, since he was the original inspector who had flagged the fault. He stared at the message, exhaustion giving way to something sharper, not vengeance, but a quiet, burning sense that the truth was finally catching up to the people who had ignored it. Vivian, meanwhile, landed at her destination unaware that her own operations director had spent the last hour fielding frantic calls from the Federal Aviation Administration. The board had cross-referenced Marcus's buried report with in-flight data from 3 Callaway jets showing pressure irregularities eerily similar to his warning. When her assistant finally handed her the phone, her voice tight with barely controlled panic, Vivian expected a scheduling issue. Instead, she heard the words, immediate grounding and safety violation and federal investigation, and for the first time in years, felt the ground shift beneath the empire she had built. The investigation moved fast. Within 72 hours, every jet in the affected line, 26 aircraft representing nearly half of Callaway Aerospace's active luxury fleet, was grounded pending inspection. News outlets picked up the story immediately, and buried in the official report was a single name that made Vivian's stomach twist: Marcus Voss, the inspector whose original warning had been ignored, the same man she had personally ordered removed from her jet less than a week earlier. When she realized who he was, the memory of his daughter's tear-streaked face and his own quiet, dignified silence hit her with a force she hadn't expected. Vivian requested a meeting with Marcus, not through lawyers or handlers, but personally, arriving at his small repair shop in a plain sedan instead of her usual entourage. She found him in his coveralls, hands stained with grease. Nora's surgery successfully completed just 2 days earlier thanks to a flight he'd managed to book through emergency travel assistance after his story reached a local news segment about the grounding scandal. Vivian stood in the doorway, uncertain for the first time in longer than she could remember, and said simply that she owed him an apology far bigger than words could carry. Marcus looked at her for a long moment, not with anger, but with the tired clarity of a man who had already moved past the need for revenge. He told her that he didn't need her guilt, but he hoped she'd remember what it felt like to be looked at like you didn't matter, and use that memory to build something better. Something in Vivian cracked open in that moment. She didn't cry, not yet, but she asked if she could see Nora, and Marcus, after a pause, agreed. When Vivian knelt beside the little girl's hospital bed and Nora, only just recovering, smiled up at her without an ounce of the resentment Vivian felt she deserved, something in the CEO's chest loosened for the first time in years. She spent the following weeks overhauling Callaway Aerospace's safety review process, personally reinstating and publicly crediting Marcus's original report, and establishing a foundation in Nora's name to fund pediatric heart surgeries for families who couldn't afford them. It wasn't redemption wrapped in a bow, it was slow, imperfect, and it cost her nearly everything she thought mattered: her flawless public image, half her board's confidence, and the illusion that her wealth made her untouchable. But it gave her something she hadn't had in a long time, a reason to feel like the empire she'd built was actually worth something. Marcus never asked for an apology tour or a payout, and he never got the viral justice-served moment the internet wanted to turn his story into. What he got was smaller and far more important: his daughter's laughter echoing through their small house again, a new contract helping Callaway Aerospace rebuild its safety culture from the ground up, and the quiet knowledge that sometimes the world does eventually see the people it tries to overlook. If this story moved something in you, if you believe that dignity can outlast humiliation and that truth has a way of grounding even the highest towers of power, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Before we close this story, if you're watching this on your phone right now, do us a favor and type "kindness wins" in the comments so we know this story reached your heart. And if it did reach you, even just a little, let that be the reminder you carry forward: the way you treat someone who seems to have nothing may one day determine whether everything you've built still stands.